Hello, I'm Zanzi. You are listening to Farmers Inside Track, proudly brought to you by Food for Mzansi. I am your host, Patricia Tembo, and today we're going to explore the importance of soil aggregates and microbial communities or microbial villages that help form and stabilize soil. So this topic is quite important for the maintenance of soil health and productivity. This episode is set to be informative and practical as we welcome Dr. Buhlebelive Mndzebele, who is a researcher under the Division of Crop Sciences at the Agricultural Research Council. Dr. Mndzebele, welcome to Farmers Inside Track. We're pleased to have you on the podcast again. Yeah, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be part of this important discussion.
This podcast was prompted by a research article that you were a part of. Do you mind maybe briefly describing what the research was about?
What's happening, there is a project in breads where we are doing wheat varieties, durum wheat and bread wheat. So what we're looking at, that one is basically to look at the aspect of nitrogen cycling, so that what we arrive at is that processes within the soil, how do they contribute to the health of the soil? And then more leaning towards whatever that happens in the soil. If it's good enough, then it's going to enhance growth. So the aspect of yield was not the main thing. We're just looking at the soil health, the nitrogen cycling, and all the aspects to show the soil health. And then on those, it's a durum wheat, and then the one bread wheat, 10 cultivars of each. We did it in breads. It was over 2 years. Just to help. And fortunately, there is a student also who is part of it. I think he's going to finish in 1.5 years, just to even get more information on that. It will be good maybe after the project, when it's almost done. We can also share some of the results just for those who might be interested in that aspect to benefit a bit more.
And I suppose this interview today is going to zoom in a bit more on like the soil, and from the study, what you've deduced from the studies that you've done in terms of soil aggregates, and break it down for farmers listening and why it's important for them, to consider these aspects. Can you explain in simple terms what soil aggregates are and why it's important for farmers to know?
Soil aggregates, I'll just briefly explain. I like to use examples a lot. So our soils, they would normally have the basics of there's sand, there's silt, there's clay, and then there's organic matter. It is, to explain it more in a simpler way, it is when all those are combined. And then why is that important if you've got all those combined? Because if you were to have your clay, silt, and all those ones sitting on their own, they are not really useful. But it is them when they are combined, and then they form a structure. And then that structure is then able to help roots to grow. And then if you've got that kind of structure, you also have good water retention. And then when you also have soil aggregates, it is also a home for nutrients. The nutrients that are absorbed by the roots, they stay in those aggregates, and then roots are able to take those nutrients. It's the ones that are mainly in short supply in South Africa: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those ones, they help a lot. And the other one that is key, if you've got soil aggregates and then your soil in its movement, so it does not move that, so it tends to be beneficial when it comes to soil erosion. So briefly, that's what one would say. Why are they important?
And you mentioned water retention, which we'll likely speak a bit more about, as we go on, because I think that's quite important.
Water retention, what it does, when you apply water in crop production, you apply on the soil, that is your growing media. So it can either come in through rainfed, and then also you can then introduce it artificially through irrigation. So what would happen is that in your soil, you would want as much water to sit there, but not so much to sit and then be problematic. So water retention, it is the ability of the soil to hold water so that the roots that benefit through production, then they would be able to take up the sufficient water up for them to benefit out of that. And then the remaining, it will just drain.
And going back to soil aggregates, I know soil microbes play an important role in the forming of, soil aggregates. So maybe if you can speak a little bit more about the role microbes play.
Yes, so what microbes do, I'll just put it in a most very, very simple sense. It is as a clue. And then the other one that is important, it is for them to actually help in decomposition. I'll just speak more on legumes. When legumes grow at the end of the season, and then for the nutrients to be bioavailable, they have to decompose. So that's an important one. Where decomposition, it then helps the nitrogen and the phosphorus to be then bioavailable to the soil and also to the crops that would follow after growing that crop. Another thing that is key, microbes, they also help in the regulation of soil pH. pH, for nutrients to be able to be taken up, there should be a certain specific pH for that particular crop. So microbes, they play a very important role to say before the soils would, the crops would take up those nutrients, then the pH would be in the correct level for the plants to take up, and then the nutrient would be taken up appropriately.
Speaking on the nutrients, is it possible to maybe explain what nutrients are that the soil microbes help with in terms of absorption or availability of those nutrients in the soil? Yeah, maybe if you can speak a little bit more about the nutrients availability.
Within the South African context, if you are looking at the nutrients that are in short supply more on that are of an issue, it is nitrogen, phosphorus, and also potassium, those three. And then the other one that we normally look at, if we are looking at the pH, it is the calcium and magnesium, maybe sulfur if there is a lot of alkalinity in the soil. But then those are the ones that are normally problematic, or that would be of concern. Then when soil microbes come in, they would kind of enhance that process, the ones that are already needed in huge amounts, and then to kind of balance that one and make them available.
I know as a student, soil scientists, would definitely hammer on the fact that the practices that farmers that they do kill soil microbes. Maybe if you can speak about practices that farmers you have seen doing, especially in our South African context right now, like what is it that kills the soil microbes and reduces the ability for the soil to aggregate?
What I've seen in my experience, monocropping, it is one. Monocropping where one would, farmers normally would practice growing the same crop over and over again, same length, and then disturb the soil. That's one big killer. Of course, there could be an argument of saying no, but the nation has to be fed. People are trying to do food security. My kind of thought process, it is more on doing whatever that could be done in saving the soil. That one, it's very important to say let's preserve our environment as much as we would like to have food. That's one of the things that would be a problematic. As people are also now then doing monoculture, they would indefinitely then apply a lot of fertilizers. That's become problematic. Microbes, they would tend to be limited or reduced if one introduces a lot of fertilizers, and that would come in a lot of chemicals. That would also reduce a lot of microbiology in the soil. Another one that is important, over irrigation, it's also a problem. As much as we require water, the minute you have a lot of it then tends to be problematic for the soil. And one of the things that would be key is that as there is movement on the soil, farmers are doing crop production, machinery and all that. There is compaction that also disturbs a lot of microbiology in the soil. So those would be some of these things that I have seen to say, no, they really impact badly on the aggregates and also therefore affecting the microbes in the soil.
So the main culprits, as you mentioned now, would then be monocropping, as you said, and we see that quite often. And then I suppose it's dependence on fertilizer, because there is a time and place for fertilizer, would you say?
No, what is happening? Monocropping, where it becomes problematic over time, if there is no effort into maybe rehabilitating the soil, the productivity of the soil would reduce, even though it could, the microbiology are then eaten immediately. You disturb the soil, you disturb the microbes, and then the biological side of the soil, it's then affected. You might maintain other things and then still produce, but that one is affected a lot.
You also mentioned over irrigation, and I'm wondering now with the heavy rainfall we've been getting, is that something that is considered to be, that would affect soil aggregates or the soil?
Definitely it would. It's unfortunate because what you would expect for just on average, speaking on the good amount of rain in a week, anything between 20 and 30 millimeters, that's good enough for the crops. That's just a rough estimate off my head without necessarily addressing a specific crop. But now, if you've got a lot, for instance, if the farmer would have applied fertilizer and all that one, I'm in Poch as I'm speaking to you now. We had to stop going to the field for quite some time because the soil is a bit shallow, the clay content is high. As you observe other fields, you can't even enter there. So now if there is water above ground, then you would imagine what is happening below ground in the roots and all that one. Some of the plants, they are even yellowing, dying. So it does impact a lot because then aggregates, what it does, as much as you'd want them to benefit the soil in terms of holding the nutrients and then the particles together. But then if there is now no space, there is a lot of water, there should be that good balance, the good balance in terms of the air and then the water and all that one, so that the roots are then able to breathe easily and then also access the necessary nutrients.
And maybe looking at ways now farmers can improve soil aggregation on their soil. What are your tips? What advice do you have?
What I would say when it comes to the things that farmers would kind of lean towards when it comes to improving soil aggregate is the increase of organic matter. What I mean by that, to say when it comes to us growing crops, leaning more towards the crop residues. So we retain them, especially the leguminous ones that would come in with a lot of nutrients. More of a natural way to also add nutrition, contribute towards soil nutrition. And the other one that one would encourage, it is a minimum soil disturbance. As much as we might want to grow our crops, if possible, we don't disturb the soil as much. What we did when we're doing the weed project in breads, we used a ripper where we did not turn the soil upside down. The ripper was just meant for us to open the pores so that we are able to just be able to grow the crops. So minimum soil disturbance, it plays an important role. And the other one that is key, a very old crop practice, crop rotation. You grow maize, the next year it's followed by beans, and then you change again and again. So the same soil, you then expose it to different types of crops. And then one other one that I did for my PhD study, it is intercropping, where now you in one land, you then have different crops that would help in you being able to be able to grow a lot of crops in one area. And also when you've prepared land and in terms of even nutrient access, you've got maize, you've got beans, and then the roots are able to access nutrients at different depths. Those are the things that one would promote for a farmer. It's old practices. And then I'm more speaking on a smallholder farmer to say the larger population, people are able to practice those ones. It's actually also something that is not costly, even if it's a small scale, people are able to practice. The major thing for me, if we're then all able to address the food security in smaller corners and big corners, then would not have a bigger problem.
Then I throw in a little bit of a tricky question here. You mentioned minimizing soil disturbance, and I guess one would assume that would be resting the soil. And to do that, We know a lot of farmers right now have challenge of land accessibility. And, one would have to rest the soil. You would have to have alternative or other soil to be producing your crop. What would you suggest for farmers who maybe have limited access to land? What tips do you have for farmers in that case in terms of minimizing soil disturbance? Because, we know that farmers are trying to make a living from the cultivation. I suppose this resting the soil is quite a challenge.
For minimum tillage, what we do is that you would still go and prepare the soil, but then you use mechanisms of not turning it the conventional way. You would have your disc plow, your harrow, and all those things. You literally take the topsoil, you turn it upside down, and then it follows by harrow and all those things. So if we say minimum soil disturbance, some of them, what you do is that where there is it could be land that is there. So you'd actually create spaces where you would want to put the seed and then you grow there. Or maybe even if you distend the soil, you don't just turn it upside down. But in terms of if one then rests the soil, that one for me, it can be a challenge. But then I would say rather than resting, crop rotation, it's an option. So what you do is that the same soil that you have, which is what you would have at home, this year you've grown maize on the same soil. Next year you bring your legume, and then the next year you bring another crop like that. In that way, then you are then able to have your soil functional continuously than to rest in people's just to leave it a fallow like that. It might be problematic to food security.
You mentioned having organic matters is important for having beneficial microbes. What other ways or natural ways are there for farmers to introduce or to encourage soil microbe populations?
Yes, I think that there is a crop rotation. There is mulching also. Mulching, what you do, like you more only look at grass mulch, that would be important. Is the intercropping, a crop rotation, minimum tillage. Those are the ones that and what we practice as the ARC. The other one that is key for us, it is the issue of cover crop. So what we do is that as much as possible, if we lean towards crop rotation or crop production practices, something that would cover the ground as much as possible, and also the inclusion of legumes like through intercropping and also crop rotation, for that encourages a lot of microbiology in the soil. And it's more something that the farmers are also able to do easily and conveniently.
And maybe what are signs low soil microbial activity that farmers can look out for so that they can pay attention to these methods you've just mentioned?
Physically, it might be a challenge for one to actually see. I think one of the signs that one would see, like visible signs, the crops would show through the above ground nutrient deficiency. That's one would see to say there is a problem below ground. But because the microbiology was speaking about something that happens below the soil, below ground. But then the visible signs are normally visible above ground. So you'd normally see the nutrient deficiency, how the leaves are those would be the one would have to observe the leaves, and then based on, because what would happen, microbiology, they support nutrients, the major nutrients that are supposed to be taken up by the plant. So there's different symptoms that one would observe in the leaves, and then one would then see, okay, to say, no, there's a problem. But then for one to even not to get there where there is a problem, then we say to the farmers should learn these practices and avoid to see problems at the end. So I would rather say myself, it's better that we go for the interventions of prevention than to react should there be a problem.
I guess wrapping up, maybe you can share a little bit more about the Wish Roots project and, how you're involved and how South African farmers can get involved in it.
It is a project is done by the Agricultural Research Council. It is a project that is done by the ARC at Bretts, one of our satellite stations in Bretts. So what we do, we're doing it on two wheat varieties, the durum wheat and also the bread wheat. We are looking at the soil health aspect In that regard, what we're looking at, our focus is mainly on the nitrogen recycling. It's a project that is almost finishing, unfortunately, this year. So, but how our farmers can get involved, we would gladly share. I think at the end of the season, when the student is done with their studies, to say, what data have we received, we'll be happy to come to this platform again and share our results, just to summarize, to say, okay, this is what we have received in terms of the soil health. That would then speak to the above ground biomass, would related to at this point in time, because it is a study that is in progress. We are not able to specifically share to say this is how the wheat is going to behave as affected by soil health. But then definitely, I think in a year or so or less, would have those answers. So farmers are clearly welcome to come to the ARC and then maybe consult and then learn more from the project, as you also are getting data and also benefit from it.
Your expertise in the field is very valued by farmers. I'm curious to know, what have you come across the farmers that you're seeing that you would to relay, thing that you'd like to emphasize? I think it'll be quite beneficial for your farmers listening to an expert, with crop production and soil. And what are you seeing farmers currently doing in South Africa that you would like, that maybe you have something to comment on or say?
What I've seen myself more on a smallholder farmers, where I've got quite a bit of exposure, there's less attention in following appropriate crop production procedures. Before a farmer would go work on the soil of this interview, it does not have anything to do with the microbiology and the soil aggregates. One of the things that farmers would do is to test the soil. And then in testing the soil will then provide guidance on saying this, how much nutrients are there, how much is short, and then there should be that balance in terms of then how much should be then applied. And then the other one that is key, it is for us to kind of go back to what in the olden days our grannies, they used to grow a lot of crops through using crop rotation, intercrop, also leaning more towards resources that are currently there. When a farmer has a crop residues, there is coal manure, there is chicken manure, and all these other things. It's important for farmers to actually lean more towards that. My advice is to say, let farmers use whatever resources that are available around and then lean more towards that. Yes, the yield might not be what is desired. Everyone would want to get as much in terms of the yield and as soon as possible. But then we've got an environment that we are supposed to save. If the land that is there is supposed to be there for the next whatever hundreds of years, the manner in which we must handle it, that would be the approach. It's better for the land to be less productive and continuously produce than for it to be pushed to limits and then it loses out on its productivity and then the next generations might not benefit from it. So I'm leaning more towards that kind of production and more to encourage farmers to consult as much as possible. It does no harm before one starts. You tell us where you are. We recommend the crops that you are able to do, practices that we are able to do. How should you irrigate? How much fertilizer should you apply? When should you plant? The spacing and all that one. As the ARC, that's what we do more on a daily basis. And if you consult us, then we are then able to provide the necessary guidance. These campuses, ARC campuses spread all over the country. We work on different enterprises. Farmers are almost covered in most of the crops or all the crops that they are growing.
This brings us to the end of the episode. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And that is it from me, Patricia Tembo, and our technical producer, Megan van der Bent, and the rest of team Food for Mzansi. Thank you for listening.